In a small, quiet town nestled between rolling hills and sprawling fields, life moved at a predictable pace. Everyone knew each other's names, their stories, and even the secrets they tried to keep hidden. Among these familiar faces was Maria Rodriguez, a shy but curious 14-year-old girl who lived with her father, Carlos. Carlos worked as the janitor at the local high school, a job that kept him busy from dawn till dusk. Despite their modest lifestyle, Maria had an unshakable determination to rise above her circumstances. While most kids her age dreamed of becoming astronauts or movie stars, Maria wasn't sure what she wanted to be. She just knew she wanted to do something extraordinary. Maria's days were filled with routine. She woke up early to help her father clean the school before classes began, then rushed to her own lessons afterward. Her classmates often teased her about being the janitor's daughter, but Maria didn't let it bother her too much. Instead, she focused on her studies, earning top grades despite the challenges she faced at home. Her teachers admired her hard work, though many assumed her future would mirror her father's, a life of hard labor without much room for ambition. One crisp autumn morning, during a music appreciation class, the teacher decided to introduce the students to different musical instruments. The classroom buzzed with excitement as violins, flutes, and trumpets were passed around. Most students eagerly grabbed the shiny, polished instruments, eager to try their hand at making music. But when the teacher reached the back of the room, all that remained was an old, dusty violin tucked away in a worn-out case. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Its strings frayed, and its surface scratched. With a smirk, the teacher turned to Maria. "Here," he said, holding out the decrepit violin. "Maybe you can make this sound better than it looks." The comment was meant as a joke, and the entire class erupted into laughter. Some students snickered behind their hands, while others exchanged amused glances. For a moment, Maria felt a pang of embarrassment. She glanced at the violin, then back at the teacher, unsure how to respond. But instead of shrinking away, Maria surprised everyone, including herself. Without hesitation, she stood up and took the violin from the teacher's hands. "Thank you," she said softly, meeting his gaze with quiet confidence. The laughter died down almost instantly, replaced by an awkward silence. No one expected her to accept the instrument so gracefully, least of all the teacher, whose smile faltered for a brief second before he quickly moved on to the next student. As Maria sat back down, cradling the battered violin in her lap, she couldn't shake the strange feeling stirring inside her. There was something oddly beautiful about the neglected instrument, as if it carried untold stories within its weathered frame. That evening, when she brought it home, her father raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" he asked, pointing to the case. "It's a violin," Maria replied, opening it carefully. "The teacher gave it to me." Carlos chuckled, shaking his head. "Well, I guess we'll have to see if you can make it sing." His words were lighthearted, but there was a flicker of pride in his eyes. He always believed in Maria's potential, even when the world seemed determined to doubt her. Little did anyone know, this seemingly insignificant moment would set off a chain of events that would change Maria's life, and the lives of those around her, forever. That evening, Maria sat cross-legged on the floor of their tiny living room, the violin resting awkwardly in her lap. The faint scent of polish and dust lingered as she opened the case again, examining the instrument under the dim light of a single bowl hanging from the ceiling. Its strings were frayed, and one of the pegs felt loose, but to Maria, it seemed almost magical, a treasure waiting to be rediscovered. She had never held a violin before, let alone played one, but something about its delicate curves and intricate design fascinated her. Her father, Carlos, watched curiously from the corner of the room. "You really think you can learn how to play that thing?" he asked, his voice tinged with both amusement and encouragement. "I don't know," Maria admitted, running her fingers lightly over the strings. "But I want to try." With no teacher or guidebook to help her, Maria turned to the only resource she had, the internet. Pulling out her old phone, she searched for videos of people playing the violin. At first, the sounds coming from her instrument were far from musical, more like screeches and scratches that made her wince. But Maria didn't give up. Every wrong note was a step closer to getting it right, and every clumsy bow stroke taught her something new. The next few weeks became a blur of practice sessions late into the night. After finishing her homework and helping her father clean up after dinner, Maria would retreat to her makeshift practice area, a corner of the living room cleared just enough for her to stand without bumping into furniture. Her father often sat nearby, quietly fixing tools or mending clothes while listening to her play. Sometimes he'd clap softly after a particularly good attempt, offering words of encouragement. "You're getting better," he'd say, even if the music still sounded rough around the edges. Maria's determination wasn't just fueled by curiosity. It was also driven by a deep desire to prove herself. She remembered the laughter in the classroom when the teacher handed her the violin, the way some of her classmates rolled their eyes as if they already knew she'd fail. It stung, but instead of letting it bring her down, Maria used it as motivation. Each time she hit a sour note, she reminded herself why she started. She wanted to show them, and herself, that she was capable of more than anyone expected. One evening, as she experimented with a simple melody she'd heard on the radio, something remarkable happened. For the first time, the notes flowed smoothly, blending together in a way that sounded almost beautiful. Maria froze, holding the bow midair, her heart racing. Had she really done that? She replayed the same sequence, slower this time, and sure enough, the sound came out clear and melodic. A wide grin spread across her face, and she couldn't stop herself from laughing out loud. Carlos looked up from his work, startled by her sudden burst of joy. "What is it?" he asked. "I did it," Maria exclaimed, her eyes shining with excitement. "I actually made it sound good." Her father smiled warmly, setting aside his tools to listen as she played the short tune again. Though it was far from perfect, there was an undeniable charm in the music. It was raw and heartfelt, carrying a piece of Maria's spirit within each note. For the first time, Carlos realized that this wasn't just a passing hobby for his daughter. It was a passion taking root. As the days went by, Maria's confidence grew. She began spending every spare moment practicing, determined to improve. Her fingers developed calluses from pressing against the strings, and her arms ached from holding the bow steady. But none of it mattered. Every small victory kept her going. What started as a joke from her teacher had transformed into a journey of self-discovery, one that filled Maria with a sense of purpose she never felt before. Unbeknownst to her, someone else had begun noticing her progress too. Mrs. Harper, the school's strict yet respected music teacher, occasionally passed by empty classrooms during lunch breaks where Maria practiced in secret. At first, the sounds were jarring and uneven, but over time, they grew clearer, more refined. Mrs. Harper found herself pausing outside the door, intrigued not only by the improvement in Maria's playing, but also by the sheer dedication behind it. Little did Maria know, these quiet moments of practice were about to lead to something life-changing. Maria's secret practice sessions became a sacred part of her daily routine. Every lunch break, while her classmates chatted and laughed over their meals, she slipped away to an empty classroom or the school auditorium, violin in hand. These quiet moments were hers alone, a chance to escape the noise of the world and lose herself in the music. At first, it was just about learning how to hold the bow properly or figuring out which finger went where on the strings. But as the days turned into weeks, Maria began to notice something incredible. She was improving. The old violin, once dismissed as useless, now seemed to come alive under her touch. Its worn surface might not have gleamed like the polished instruments in the music room, but the notes it produced grew clearer and more confident with each passing day. Maria poured everything she had into those stolen hours, her frustration, her dreams, her longing to prove herself. Each scratchy note was a step forward, each melody a small victory. She didn't need applause or recognition. The joy of hearing herself improve was reward enough. But practicing in secret wasn't easy. The school's halls were rarely completely empty during lunch breaks, and Maria often had to stay alert for approaching footsteps. One afternoon, as she played a simple tune in the auditorium, she heard the faint creak of the door opening behind her. Her heart skipped a beat, and she quickly lowered the violin, turning around with wide eyes. To her relief, it was only Mrs. Harper, the stern music teacher who rarely smiled unless someone earned it. Mrs. Harper stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching Maria with an unreadable expression. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Maria felt a wave of panic wash over her. Had she done something wrong? Was she going to get in trouble for sneaking into the auditorium? Finally, Mrs. Harper stepped inside, closing the door gently behind her. "What are you doing here?" Mrs. Harper asked, her tone firm but not unkind. I'm just practicing," Maria stammered, clutching the violin tightly against her chest. "I didn't mean to bother anyone." Mrs. Harper raised an eyebrow. "You've been coming here every day, haven't you?" Maria nodded hesitantly, unsure of what to say next. She expected a lecture about rules or being sent back to the cafeteria. But instead, Mrs. Harper surprised her by walking closer. "Play something for me," she said simply. Maria blinked, taken aback. "What?" "You heard me. Play." Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the violin again. Choosing a short piece she'd been working on, Maria closed her eyes and focused on the music. The notes spilled out, hesitant at first, but gaining strength as she relaxed into the rhythm. When she finished, she opened her eyes to find Mrs. Harper staring at her intently, her lips pressed into a thin line. "That wasn't bad," Mrs. Harper admitted after a pause. "Not perfect, but promising." Maria's cheeks flushed with pride, though she tried to hide it. "Thank you," she murmured softly. Over the next few days, Maria noticed Mrs. Harper lingering near the auditorium more often than usual. Sometimes, the teacher would stop by briefly, offering quick tips or correcting Maria's posture. Other times, she'd simply listen from a distance, nodding thoughtfully before moving on. Though Mrs. Harper never explicitly said why she kept returning, Maria sensed that the older woman saw something in her, a spark worth nurturing. One afternoon, after another impromptu lesson, Mrs. Harper finally broke the silence. "You know," she began, adjusting her glasses, "you're wasting your talent practicing alone like this. If you want to learn properly, I could give you lessons." Maria's jaw dropped. "Me? Are you sure?" Mrs. Harper gave her a rare smile. "I don't offer this to just anyone, but you've got grit, and that's half the battle. Meet me here tomorrow after school, and we'll start." For the rest of the day, Maria couldn't stop smiling. She replayed Mrs. Harper's words in her mind over and over, hardly believing they were real. This was the opportunity she'd been waiting for, not because someone else believed in her, but because she had proven to herself that she deserved it. As she walked home that evening, violin case swinging at her side, Maria felt a sense of hope bloom within her. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew she was ready to face them head-on. Years passed, and Maria's life transformed in ways she could never have imagined during those quiet evenings practicing in her tiny living room. From the girl who once clutched a broken violin handed to her as a joke, she grew into one of the most celebrated violinists of her generation. Her performances took her to grand concert halls around the world, places with glittering chandeliers, velvet seats, and audiences dressed in their finest attire. Yet, no matter how far she traveled or how much acclaim she received, Maria never forgot where she came from. Her old violin, now carefully restored and polished, sat proudly in her dressing room before every performance. It was more than just an instrument. It was a symbol of resilience, a reminder of the journey that had shaped her. Before stepping onto any stage, Maria would run her fingers over its surface, whispering words of gratitude to the younger version of herself who refused to give up. "You did this," she'd say softly, as if speaking to the shy teenager still hiding inside her heart. Despite her success, Maria made it a point to return to her hometown regularly. She didn't come back to boast about her achievements or bask in admiration. Instead, she returned to give free workshops for children from underprivileged backgrounds. Kids like her, who might feel invisible or dismissed by the world. These sessions were lively and full of laughter, with Maria encouraging each child to pick up an instrument and try their hand at creating music. "Don't worry about making mistakes," she'd tell them, smiling warmly. "Every wrong note is a step closer to finding your voice." Her father, Carlos, often attended these workshops, sitting quietly in the corner and watching with pride as his daughter inspired others. He loved seeing the spark in the children's eyes when they realized they too could create something beautiful. Some parents approached Maria afterward, thanking her for giving their kids hope. Others shared stories of how her journey had motivated their families to dream bigger. To Maria, these moments meant more than standing ovations or glowing reviews. They were proof that her story mattered beyond herself. One particular visit stood out. A young boy named Javier, whose family struggled to make ends meet, reminded Maria so much of her younger self. Shy and unsure, he hesitated when offered a guitar to play. But after some gentle encouragement from Maria, he began strumming awkwardly, his face lighting up when he finally hit a clear chord. Later, his mother pulled Maria aside, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "For the first time, my son believes he can be something special." Maria hugged her tightly, feeling a lump rise in her throat. In that moment, she understood the true power of her journey. It wasn't just about achieving greatness, but inspiring others to chase their dreams, no matter the odds stacked against them. Even those who had doubted her years ago found themselves drawn to her concerts. Teachers who once laughed at the idea of her playing professionally now attended her shows, applauding enthusiastically alongside the rest of the audience. After one such performance, Mr. Thompson approached her backstage, holding out a bouquet of flowers. "I know I'll never fully undo what I said back then," he admitted, looking genuinely remorseful. "But I want you to know, I'm proud of you, Maria. You've changed our town, and maybe even the world." Maria accepted the flowers with grace, offering him a forgiving smile. "We all make mistakes," she replied gently. "What matters is learning from them and growing." As her career continued to flourish, Maria used her platform to advocate for arts education in underserved communities. She partnered with organizations to provide instruments and scholarships to talented students who lacked resources. Her foundation, aptly named The Spark Within, became a beacon of hope for countless aspiring musicians. Through it all, she remained humble, always crediting her father, Mrs. Harper, and her own unyielding determination for her success. In the end, Maria's legacy wasn't defined by awards or accolades, but by the lives she touched along the way. She proved that talent knows no boundaries, that greatness isn't determined by wealth, privilege, or circumstance, but by courage, perseverance, and belief in oneself. And though she stood on stages that once seemed impossible to reach, she carried with her the spirit of a girl who dared to dream, armed only with a battered violin and an unshakable faith in her potential. The melody of Maria's life played on, resonating far beyond the notes she coaxed from strings. It echoed in the hearts of everyone she inspired, reminding them that even the smallest spark could set the world ablaze. As the applause roared through the auditorium, Maria stood frozen on stage, her heart swelling with emotions she couldn't quite put into words. The sound of clapping hands and cheering voices washed over her like a tidal wave, leaving her breathless. For so long, she had carried the weight of doubt, from others and from within herself. But now, in this moment, it felt lighter than air. She glanced out at the crowd again, searching for familiar faces. Her father was wiping tears from his eyes, his broad smile unmistakable even from afar. Mrs. Harper sat beside him, her arms crossed, but her lips curved upward in quiet satisfaction. But what struck Maria most was the change in her classmates. Earlier that day, some of them had mocked her or whispered bets about how quickly she'd stumble on stage. Now those same students were on their feet, clapping enthusiastically, their expressions filled with shock and admiration. A few even mouthed "wow" as they caught her gaze. It wasn't just respect she saw in their eyes. It was awe. And while part of her wanted to savor the sweetness of proving them wrong, another part felt compassion. They hadn't believed in her because they didn't know her story. But tonight, she showed them who she truly was. After the initial burst of applause died down, Maria bowed deeply, her cheeks flushed with gratitude. As she stepped off the stage, several teachers approached her, their faces glowing with pride. "Maria, that was extraordinary," one of them said, shaking her hand warmly. Another added, "We're so proud of you." Even Mr. Thompson, the teacher who had originally handed her the violin as a joke, looked sheepish as he offered a quiet, "Well done." Later that evening, after the showcase ended, Maria found herself surrounded by well-wishers. Some classmates she barely knew came up to congratulate her, their earlier skepticism replaced by genuine enthusiasm. One girl, Sarah, whom Maria had always admired from afar, hugged her tightly. "I can't believe how amazing you are," Sarah exclaimed. "You totally crushed it." Despite the overwhelming support, not everyone reacted kindly. A few students still muttered under their breath, refusing to acknowledge her talent openly. Others dismissed her success as a fluke, claiming she'd simply gotten lucky. But Maria didn't let their negativity dampen her spirit. She knew better than to seek validation from people who refused to see her worth. Instead, she focused on the people who mattered: her father, Mrs. Harper, and the growing number of supporters who celebrated her journey. The next morning, life at school felt different. Students who had once ignored her now greeted her with smiles and nods of respect. Teachers treated her with newfound admiration, often stopping her in the hallway to praise her performance. The principal even announced during assembly that Maria would represent the school at an upcoming regional music competition, a first for someone from her background. When the announcement was made, the entire student body erupted into applause, many turning to cheer directly at Maria. Still, the transformation wasn't without its challenges. With recognition came pressure. Suddenly, everyone expected greatness from her, and Maria worried about living up to those expectations. Could she really compete against students from wealthier schools with access to private tutors and expensive instruments? Doubts crept back in, threatening to overshadow her confidence. Sensing her unease, Mrs. Harper pulled her aside after class one afternoon. "You've already proven yourself," Mrs. Harper said firmly, meeting Maria's worried gaze. "Don't let fear steal your momentum. You earned this opportunity, and no one can take that away from you." Her words reassured Maria, reminding her that success wasn't about perfection. It was about growth. Determined to rise to the occasion, Maria threw herself into preparing for the regional competition. Her father rearranged his schedule to ensure he could attend rehearsals, offering words of encouragement whenever she doubted herself. Together, they scoured thrift stores and online marketplaces until they found a gently used violin, a step up from her old one, that gave her sound a richer, fuller quality. With each passing day, Maria grew more confident in her abilities. She practiced tirelessly, fine-tuning every note and mastering complex techniques. Yet, amidst the hard work, she never lost sight of why she started: to prove that passion and perseverance could overcome any obstacle. By the time the date of the regional competition arrived, Maria felt ready, not just to perform, but to inspire. Whatever happened next, she knew she had already won: the battle against self-doubt, the fight for recognition, and the chance to rewrite her own story. The day of the regional music competition arrived, and Maria woke up with a mix of excitement and nerves coursing through her veins. This was no ordinary school talent showcase. It was a grand event held in a sprawling auditorium filled with students from elite schools across the district. Many of them came from families who could afford private lessons, top-tier instruments, and years of training. Maria knew she didn't have the same advantages, but she also knew one thing: she had heart. And sometimes, that made all the difference. As she walked into the venue alongside Mrs. Harper and her father, Maria felt small amidst the sea of polished violins, tailored outfits, and confident competitors. Parents chatted animatedly about their children's accomplishments, while teachers exchanged knowing glances about which students were guaranteed to win. Maria couldn't help but notice the sideways glances some participants gave her. The girl carrying a second-hand violin in a slightly worn case. She squared her shoulders and reminded herself why she was there. It wasn't to compete against others, it was to prove something to herself. When her turn came, Maria stepped onto the stage, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the microphone stand. The lights were brighter than she expected, and for a brief moment, she felt overwhelmed by the size of the audience. Rows upon rows of people stretched out before her, their eyes fixed on her every move. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and thought of her father working late nights to support her dreams, of Mrs. Harper patiently guiding her through countless lessons, and of all the hours she'd spent practicing alone in empty classrooms. Then, with a calm determination, she raised her violin and began to play. From the very first note, the room fell silent. Her performance was flawless, not just technically precise, but deeply emotional. Each bow stroke carried the weight of her journey, and each note seemed to tell a story of resilience and hope. She played Vivaldi's Spring Again, the same piece that had captivated her school audience, but this time it felt even more powerful. The melody soared through the auditorium, filling every corner with warmth and energy. When she reached the final crescendo, the sound lingered in the air like sunlight breaking through clouds. For several seconds after she finished, there was complete silence. Then, the crowd erupted into applause louder than anything Maria had ever experienced. People stood, cheering and whistling, their faces glowing with admiration. Even the judges, usually stoic and reserved, couldn't hide their astonishment. One of them leaned over to another, whispering loudly enough for those nearby to hear. That was extraordinary. After the performances ended, the judges deliberated for what felt like an eternity. Maria sat quietly with her father and Mrs. Harper, trying to steady her racing heart. Finally, the host returned to the stage to announce the winners. Third place went to a cellist from a prestigious academy, and second place was awarded to a pianist whose family had flown in renowned instructors for years. Then came the announcement for first place. In first place, the host declared, pausing dramatically, Maria Rodriguez. Maria's world seemed to stop for a moment. Had she heard correctly? Her father jumped to his feet, clapping wildly, while Mrs. Harper beamed beside her. As Maria made her way to the stage to accept her trophy, the applause grew deafening. Tears streamed down her face as she looked out at the crowd, seeing not just strangers, but everyone who had doubted her, and everyone who had believed in her. In the weeks that followed, Maria's victory became the talk of the town. Local newspapers wrote articles about the janitor's daughter who stunned the region with her violin, and neighbors stopped by to congratulate Carlos, who proudly showed off photos of his daughter holding her trophy. Teachers at her school who had once underestimated her now spoke of her with admiration, calling her an inspiration to all students. Even Mr. Thompson, the teacher who had handed her the broken violin as a joke, approached her one afternoon with a sheepish smile. "I owe you an apology," he said sincerely. "I never imagined you'd achieve so much. You've taught us all a lesson about perseverance." Maria nodded graciously, accepting his words without bitterness. Forgiveness came naturally to her because she understood how easy it was to underestimate someone based on appearances. What mattered most was that she had proven herself, not just to them, but to herself. Her success opened doors she hadn't dared to dream of. The regional win earned her a scholarship to attend a renowned music conservatory, where she would receive formal training and access to resources she'd only imagined before. Yet, despite these new opportunities, Maria remained grounded. She knew her journey wasn't just about. The next afternoon, Maria arrived at the auditorium with a mix of excitement and nervousness bubbling inside her. She had spent the entire night thinking about Mrs. Harper's offer, replaying every word in her mind. Was this really happening? Could she, the janitor's daughter who had once been laughed at for even holding a violin, actually learn to play like the professionals? The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. Mrs. Harper was already waiting when Maria walked in, sitting on the edge of the stage with a polished violin case resting beside her. Unlike the worn-out instrument Maria carried, this one gleamed under the soft lights of the auditorium. "Good, you're punctual," Mrs. Harper said briskly, standing up. "That's important. Now, let's see what we're working with." Maria handed over her old violin, feeling a pang of embarrassment as Mrs. Harper inspected it. The teacher turned it over in her hands, examining the scratches, frayed strings, and loose pegs. For a moment, Maria feared she'd be told it wasn't good enough. But instead, Mrs. Harper simply nodded. "It'll do for now," she said firmly. "We'll make adjustments as we go." Their first lesson began with the basics: how to hold the violin correctly, how to position the bow, and how to maintain proper posture. To Maria, these were things she thought she'd already mastered through trial and error. But Mrs. Harper quickly pointed out flaws she hadn't noticed before. "Your wrist is too stiff," the teacher said, gently adjusting Maria's grip on the bow. "Relax your hand. Let the music flow." At times, Maria felt overwhelmed by the flood of instructions. Her arms ached from holding the violin steady, and her fingers fumbled awkwardly as she tried to follow Mrs. Harper's guidance. Yet, despite the challenges, she refused to give up. Every correction was a chance to improve, and every note she played, even if it sounded off-key, brought her closer to her goal. What surprised Maria most was Mrs. Harper's patience. Though the teacher was known for being strict, there was an unexpected kindness in her approach. She didn't scold Maria for mistakes. Instead, she encouraged her to try again, offering gentle reminders and praise when something went right. "That's better," Mrs. Harper would say after a particularly clean note. "See, you can do this." As the weeks passed, their lessons became a highlight of Maria's days. After school, while other students headed home or hung out with friends, Maria eagerly made her way to the auditorium, violin case in hand. Each session brought new challenges: scales, arpeggios, and eventually short melodies, but also new triumphs. Slowly but surely, Maria's playing transformed from hesitant scratches into confident, flowing tunes. One evening, as they wrapped up a lesson, Mrs. Harper paused and looked at Maria thoughtfully. "You've come a long way," she said, her voice softer than usual. "I hope you realize that." Maria smiled shyly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Thank you for teaching me. I don't think I could have done any of this without you." Mrs. Harper shook her head. "Don't thank me yet. You're the one putting in the work. Talent is nothing without effort, and you've got plenty of both." Encouraged by her teacher's words, Maria threw herself into practicing even harder. She no longer cared about the whispers she sometimes heard in the hallways or the lingering doubts some people still had about her abilities. All that mattered was the music, the way it made her feel alive, the way it gave her a voice when words failed. And with each passing day, she could feel herself growing stronger, not just as a musician, but as a person. Unbeknownst to Maria, Mrs. Harper had begun talking about her progress with other teachers. One afternoon, during a staff meeting, the topic of the upcoming school talent showcase came up. Several teachers suggested featuring students from the advanced music program, but Mrs. Harper spoke up. "What about Maria Rodriguez?" she proposed, her tone firm. "She's been working tirelessly, and her improvement has been remarkable. She deserves a chance to shine." The room fell silent for a moment. Some teachers exchanged skeptical glances, remembering the girl who had once been given the broken violin as a joke. But Mrs. Harper's expression left no room for argument. Reluctantly, they agreed to let Maria audition. When Mrs. Harper told Maria about the opportunity, the girl's eyes widened in disbelief. "The talent showcase," she repeated, her voice trembling with excitement. "Are you serious?" Dead serious. Mrs. Harper replied with a small smile. But remember, this isn't just about showing off. It's about proving to yourself and everyone else that you belong here. Maria nodded, determination burning in her chest. This was her chance to show the world. The news of the school talent showcase spread quickly, and soon Maria found herself at the center of attention, though not always in a positive way. As word got out that she had been chosen to perform, whispers filled the hallways. Some students were curious, wondering how someone like Maria, who had never been part of the music program, could possibly hold her own on stage. Others were less kind, rolling their eyes or making snide comments behind her back. "She'll embarrass herself," one boy muttered loudly enough for her to hear. Another girl giggled, saying, "This is going to be hilarious." Maria tried to ignore the negativity, but it wasn't easy. Every insult felt like a tiny pebble dropped into the calm lake of her confidence, creating ripples of doubt. What if they were right? What if she froze on stage or played so poorly that everyone laughed? The thought made her stomach churn. But then she remembered Mrs. Harper's words. This isn't just about showing off. It's about proving to yourself and everyone else that you belong here. That reminder gave her strength. Her father, Carlos, noticed the change in her demeanor one evening when she came home quieter than usual. Sitting down beside her at their small kitchen table, he asked gently, "What's wrong, Maija?" Maria hesitated before admitting what was bothering her. "Some kids think I'm going to fail," she said softly, staring at her hands. "They don't believe I can do this." Carlos placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Let me tell you something," he said, his voice steady and warm. "People will always have opinions, but those opinions don't define you. You've worked hard for this, harder than anyone else knows. Don't let their words steal your joy." His advice stayed with her long after their conversation ended. The next morning, Maria walked into school with her head held high, determined not to let anyone shake her resolve. She poured even more energy into her practice sessions, spending every spare moment perfecting her piece. With Mrs. Harper's guidance, she chose Vivaldi's Spring from the Four Seasons, a lively and challenging piece that showcased both technical skill and emotional depth. It was ambitious, but Maria knew it would be worth the effort. Mrs. Harper pushed her relentlessly during rehearsals, pointing out areas where her timing faltered or her bow strokes lacked precision. "You're ready," the teacher finally said one afternoon, stepping back with a satisfied nod. "But remember, technique is only half the battle. When you're on that stage, play with your heart. Let the audience feel what you're feeling." The night of the showcase arrived faster than Maria expected. As she stood backstage, clutching her violin, she could hear the murmur of the crowd filling the auditorium. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. Peeking through the curtain, she saw rows of familiar faces, teachers, classmates, parents, all waiting to see what she would do. For a fleeting moment, panic threatened to take over. What if she messed up? What if they laughed? Then she spotted her father sitting near the front, his face glowing with pride, despite the skeptical glances around him. Beside him sat Mrs. Harper, her expression unreadable but somehow comforting. Taking a deep breath, Maria reminded herself why she was there, not to silence her critics, but to celebrate how far she'd come. When the MC called her name, the applause was polite but muted, almost as if the audience didn't expect much. Maria stepped onto the stage, the spotlight warm against her skin. The auditorium fell silent as she raised her violin, positioning it carefully under her chin. Closing her eyes, she drew the bow across the strings, letting the first note ring out clear and strong. And then magic happened. From the very first measure, Maria's playing captivated the room. Her fingers danced across the strings with precision, her bow moving gracefully as the melody flowed effortlessly. There was no hesitation, no trace of the nervous girl who had doubted herself moments earlier. Instead, there was only passion. A raw, unfiltered expression of everything she had poured into this moment. The audience seemed to hold its collective breath, transfixed by the beauty of her performance. By the time she reached the final crescendo, tears glistened in Maria's eyes. Lowering her violin, she looked out at the sea of stunned faces. For several seconds, there was complete silence. Then, as if waking from a trance, the crowd erupted into thunderous applause. People rose to their feet, clapping and cheering, their skepticism replaced by awe. Even the harshest critics couldn't deny the brilliance of what they had just witnessed. Maria glanced toward her father, who was beaming brighter than ever, and Mrs. Harper, who nodded approvingly. In that moment, she realized something profound. She hadn't just proven herself to the audience. She had proven herself to herself.